And here we go. Check, check, check. Bike two, 1 2 1 2. All right. Hello, listeners and citizens of Broncos country. My name is Adan Diaz, and I am joined by my co-host, Mr. Rich, and we are here to talk to you about our beloved Broncos. Today on Broncos Talk, we are going to talk about the defense, how it started this season, how it went during the season, how it ended at the end of the season, and what we project to see is going to happen in during the offseason. We'll also talk about our new GM, George Paton, and we'll try to get to any other Broncos news. That intro didn't go the way I planned it, so I do apologize, Rich. And I've been working on it during my mid slumberness during the day. So,
Awesome.
welcome back to the show. As I said, let's talk about the defense. Where do you see the defense going? Actually, let's start from the very beginning. What were your thoughts about the defense on paper during the training season?
So during this offseason, my honest comments was that I was very concerned with regards to interior pressure, and I still am. Mike Purcell is a great interior run stuffer, but the one thing he has typically struggled with is that direct interior pressure that you get kind of from that nose tackle or interior D lineman perspective. And then furthermore, what we would refer to as DNs or defensive ends, both left and right. We didn't really have any proven commodities there. And then when I look at the defensive end position, I like some length, both in terms of arms and height, because I believe it adds some additional wrinkles and leverage items when it comes to working with those two interior guards, particularly. And I just didn't think that we had the right pieces there on the interior to really force that pressure right up the gut. And a lot of the times throughout the season, we really saw kind of, unfortunately, a lot of that play out where we did not get that interior collapsing of the pocket from particularly the really good offensive lines, which is what I was concerned with. And, it was one of those things I was really hoping I was wrong. We'll just put it that way, right?
Mm-hmm.
I was really hoping I was wrong, and I wasn't.
Yeah, you know what? During training camp, I got so excited watching these new players coming along. All the hype that was around Isang Bassi, Devontae Bosby coming in. Seeing Von Miller, basically seeing the defense going out there and going toe to toe with Drew Lock and his offense. Even though we didn't get a full bird's eye view of the action normally, like we would any other years because of the pandemic, I was really excited. I really liked what we had on paper. I thought that the names were good. I don't think that any part of the defense was being overstretched unless there was an injury that should happen. Bryce Callahan was probably my only concern because, he was coming off of that foot injury. Nobody really knew what to expect. Were we going to get the Bryce Callahan that we saw when he was with Chicago? It left a lot up in the air. We also didn't know if, with Chris Harris Jr. gone, if on the other side, AJ Bouye could be, the guy, because he had some big shoes to fill. Now, I'll grant you, I wasn't the biggest Chris Harris Jr. fan towards the end of his tenure as a Bronco, but that's just because he kind of made me feel like he didn't want to be a Bronco anymore. Granted, he was part of the no-fly zone. Granted, he had a fantastic career in Denver, but 2019, to me, it just kind of like, it felt like he was just looking for, point a finger at somebody for their fault. So I wasn't the highest on AJ Bouye, but I tried to give him the benefit of the doubt and say, hey, you need to go out there. You need to have some chemistry and show that you guys can be the secondary. My biggest letdown in terms of by the two safeties, I love Justin Simmons. I think he played a good season. I don't think it was the best, but when he didn't get that deal done during the offseason, I felt like he needed to have a fantastic season to take to the desk at the end of 2020 and say, hey, look, here's my tape. I had this many interceptions. I had this many tackles. Pay me my money. And if I'm being honest with you, Rich, I don't think that he has made a tape that's sufficient enough to say, hey, pay me big money. I'm not saying he doesn't deserve a contract. I'm just saying he didn't do enough to earn a big contract like we wanted him to get last season. And Kareem Jackson, I kind of feel like Kareem Jackson took a step backwards, and I wouldn't be surprised if the Broncos decide to move on from him and pick up another safety in free agency.
All right, well, here we go, I guess. I think it really depends on what type of team you want to field. So I'm a huge fan coming from a physical sport myself. I for those who don't know, I'm a rugby player, so I believe in hitting people at full speed with absolutely no protection whatsoever. I think that's fun. So when I look at the physicality and that real aggressive style defense that the Broncos have traditionally fielded. I mean, we have the Orange Crush. You have even the 2015 and that whole little kind of lead up, and then even just a little bit after. I mean, you had some really, really aggressive defenses that have played for Denver. And some of our best players on the Broncos, particularly ones that are clearly Hall of Fame caliber, you have your John Lynch and you have Atwater. I mean, just to name a couple, and of course the Broncos have been snubbed regularly when it comes to the Hall of Fame voting and whatnot, but those are both Hall of Fame caliber players. I expect really physical play from the safety position, particularly on the back end, because so often in most plays, they are that last line of defense. The other thing that you want from your safeties, and this is my perspective, is a very, very aggressive play to prevent some of those deep routes and those things where they just blast down the middle. Justin Simmons has done extremely well, certainly well above league average within the top, say, 3 or 4 in terms of pass coverage and pass protection. That's why he's always been pretty good with the interceptions. He's been pretty good with some of those solo tackles. A few of the stats that I haven't been able to find, I found, I just don't pay for the Pro Football Focus subscription model, is number of tackles missed. And in addition, the other stat that I have not found is the number of yards after contact that he is allowed on average. So a lot of the times when I see Justin Simmons, in addition to those missed tackles where I've posted, again, a few animated GIFs and stuff like that, and there seems to be one per game or so where he kind of dives for that arm tackle and misses or doesn't bring his guy down right away. It happens, but unfortunately with him, he's looking for top money, and you don't want to see that type of tackling from someone who's looking for that top money. On the flip side, his pass protection is undeniable. I mean, he's lockstep with some really top flight receivers, right?
Right. No, I totally get that. And Mundungus Creevy pretty much read my mind, because that's the very first thing when I think of missed tackles is that missed tackle that he had on Sam Darnold in that Jets game. But to be honest with you, while he was at fault for that tackle, you have to realize that Alexander Johnson was the one who missed the initial one. So it should have never gotten to Justin Simmons. Justin Simmons probably thought that, hey, that should have been a sack, and that was the end of it. So, but at least he tried. If you look at that play, Kareem Jackson didn't even attempt to dive. He kind of just let Sam Darnold run into the end zone. So I can understand your point, Rich. But moving on to the next point, which brings us to this question. Well, it's not much a question, but it's a statement from Albert Knoppers. Also, thanks for watching the show, Albert. I hope Von comes back without complications. Now, this is something that you and I talked about before we went live, Rich, and it kind of feels like we're both on the same page about it. And I'm the biggest Von Miller fan there ever was. I love what he's done for this team. I love his tenacity. I love the leadership that he's brought. But due to recent, let's just say, drama that's been happening in his own personal life, there's been a lot of people in Broncos country that have turned the other cheek on Von Miller. And even if he gets cleared of these charges or this investigation or what have you, where he's found not guilty of any foul play, it doesn't seem that this is something that he can, that he can get off his back and go back to, hey, let's just go back to playing football.
No, and I'll kind of share my thoughts in the in the pre-show here that you and I were talking about, and I think that, in my opinion, I think that's really what the issue is. What I was talking about in the pre-show, I think so many Denver fans had remembered when he had his drug issues and when he tried to cheat and circumvent the drug tests and diluting the urine when it came to the drug testing. And then DeMarcus Ware came into town, and then we kind of saw Vaughn present himself differently. We saw Vaughn behave a little differently. And then all of a sudden, all these off-season and off-field issues and all these things, they just kind of stopped, literally just went away. And so I think a lot of people, a lot of fans at least, including myself, I'll squarely put myself into with that group as well, were certainly of a certain impression that he had matured. He had learned from a mentor, someone that he looked up to. Even he admitted he looked up to, starting off his NFL career and whatnot. And we kind of thought he moved on from that, those immature and kind of that way of life, so to speak. And I think even if those messages are shown to be taken out of context, even if there are no charges laid, I think fans can objectively look at what his ex-fiancée said in her statement and said, wait a minute, she never said that he never said those things. She also never said that any of that information that was posted was factually incorrect or that it was manipulated in any way, shape, or form. She just said that he never hit her, and the standard domestic violence items, which of course, I don't think any of us have any tolerance for whatsoever. So she basically just said, look, he never hit me, he never did any of those things, but she never went to that next step, which it was, stuck in the back of my head at least, to say, I'm not going to go as far as saying that what's typed there and what's written there is incorrect or inaccurate, which means he said those things. Mm-hmm. You can't take that kind of stuff back. You can't remove that from people's memory. And I think it kind of removes what everyone, including myself, thought was kind of a definitive line in Vaughn's life, and said, wait a minute, maybe that line was never there. Maybe he just hid it better. And if that's the case, I think that makes us look at Vaughn in a different way.
Yeah, George I'm sorry, I can't pronounce your last name, but thanks for watching the show. And George asks, is there proof that he did say those things? Yeah, it was all over Instagram and social media. Yes. You know what? To be honest with you, I didn't even know that they weren't even together, because I follow Megan Denise on Instagram, and she's always posting pictures of herself working out, and she has her own business deals and whatnot on the side. So up until when these messages came out, I didn't know that they were no longer together, or the fact that she was even, or still is, I should say, pregnant. So I just think that this whole situation, and I'll actually say something that I've also read from somebody that made a point that I agree. There's some things that you don't put out there that's, personal business. And this was a personal issue for both of them. This is something that should have never gotten out unless it got to a point where, there was physical abuse or mental abuse, or unless it reached that level of intensity, then yeah. But if it's just one person's opinion or what have you, then it should have just been, they're both grown adults. There is no reason for her to have gone and put, what she did out there. So unfortunately, it's all out there now. It can't be pushed to the side. It can't be. It is what it is, basically. Let's just put it out there.
Like I said, I just think what this is going to do for many, many, many Broncos fans, and I think this is what we're hearing, what we're seeing. I just think you had a certain perception that there had been a life-changing series of events, I think is an appropriate way of putting it. And I think that, the veil has perhaps been removed, and, the fans are just saying, oh, that never happened. And maybe those changes never did take place. Maybe he just hid it better. And to kind of speak back to George in his comment there, the time for those claims and those messages and whatnot to have been disputed would have been when Denise put out that public statement on Instagram with the blocked images there with the text. In all of those blocks of text and all of that writing, she did not say that the text, that the actual original text that was put out there publicly was inaccurate. She did not say that Vaughn never said it. And she also never indicated that any of the text was doctored, because and to me, what that says is it was accurate, because you have to imagine that in the middle of an investigation, you would either want your side to be heard or not. And that was her opportunity publicly in a public statement in a very public setting to address it. And if she wanted to, she could have denounced and said that those are factually inaccurate and blah, 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 blah. And she never did.
No, totally agree. And you know what? And let's just be honest, Broncos country. At this point, we can sit here and talk about this issue back and forth, but at the end of the day, we have a new GM, George Paton, which we will get into. We'll talk about later on in the show. But it'll come down to what he believes is the right thing to do. So it could be trading Vaughn. It could be not giving him an extension. It could be cutting Vaughn. It could be it'll be an interesting choice, nonetheless. But let's go on to Mundungus Creevy, who says, "I don't think it's been proven it was." I think you meant to say Vaughn yet. She says it was. He said it wasn't. We might not ever know.
Agreed.
No, and I totally agree.
And whether or not you give credibility to those original statements or not, whether or not you want to give the credibility of those statements or not, I mean, I completely agree and understand that. The fact is, though, is they could have been publicly denounced and they weren't.
Yeah.
And that has to be factored into your own personal opinion as you internalize it to try and make up your own decision in your own mind.
Yeah. George follows up with, as he says, "I'm not saying he did or not say those things, but you can't judge something that isn't credible." And he does have a point. But like we've been saying, right now it's out of our hands. What's done is done. What's been said has been said. Now it's up to the Broncos head office to see where they go from here. So Mundunga says her coming out and saying that there was no domestic violence means that he probably won't get any punishment. But if he did say it, it makes him look like a terrible person.
Correct. That was my whole point, right? It's a perception thing at this point. It's not necessarily that there was any, actual wrongdoing in terms of physical or anything like that. But it's a perception. There was a perception within the Broncos, country and probably Broncos organization that there had been a character change and a character shift and whatnot. And like it or not, it's possible that he said those things, and he hasn't come out and denied that he said those things. And there's also an investigation going on right now. So I also think that he's probably not going to put out any form of public statement, likely due to the advice of his legal counsel. And I'm very keenly interested to see what happens once the investigation comes to a conclusion, because I think at that point Vaughn will likely put out an official statement. I expect it to be very lengthy. I expect it to be kind of one of those full page or multi-page kind of really polished statements that gets put out a lot of times in these types of situations. And I'm going to be very, very curious to see what information is put out in that statement and to what level of detail is provided, and that'll help formulate my opinion as well.
Yeah, we kind of missed this question before we jumped into the Vaughn issue, so I do apologize. But George had asked before, and I'm guessing he's talking about Justin Simmons here, that he is a big part of the scheme Fangio uses to stop the Chiefs as an elite midfielder. Your thoughts, Rich?
I think that depends. He is not fast enough to keep up with a Tyreek Hill. He's not fast enough to keep up with a Nicole Hardman. And he is certainly not physical enough to compete with the likes of Travis Kelce. So if we are in fact talking about Justin Simmons, which I believe you were, George, I understand what the kind of the concept was there is that Simmons can kind of take the other guy, right? He can take all the other people and then leave those other ones for maybe the faster cornerbacks and stuff, which I agree with. I think is absolutely a possibility. However, what I think the Broncos would be better off doing is stop using Simmons the way that they're using him, because they're putting him in very exposing situations. He is not that TJ Ward, I'm going to kill you if you come across my side of the field type of safety, right? I actually think that the Broncos would serve Justin Simmons a lot better if they were able to get a sideline to sideline linebacker to replace Josie Jewell, throw Josie Jewell on the bench. Alexander Johnson has slightly more skill set than Jewell in terms of the ability to blitz and move a little bit better. And I think that would greatly help Simmons. I think that would allow Simmons to do a little bit more on the field and play more to his strengths.
Yeah, and I don't know about you, Rich, but I was pretty much took a huge gasp when the Broncos shocked the league by cutting Todd Davis just before the start of the season, and we were kind of like, what the heck's going on? What are they doing over there? Who's gonna cover? And they put all this pressure on Honey Bear, so it's like, okay, Todd Davis is gone. We don't have to worry about is he too injured to play. So it was Alexander Johnson and Josie Jewell. And out of those two linebackers, I think Johnson had the better season, but it wasn't by leaps and bounds. I think Alexander Johnson this season kind of it was more roller coaster. It wasn't as great as last year. Last year, he was like a diamond in the rough. He was making plays. He had an interception here and there. And then this year, it looked like he was trying to do the work of two people. Josie Jewell, my opinion, the same thing. There were a couple plays where he was just magnificent, where he was able to get, stuff to run. But when it came to, stopping guys like let's let Tyreek Hill, for example, or any quick wide receiver, it kind of felt like he struggled in coverage at times. So it'll be interesting to see if the Broncos look for some veteranship in terms of not so much a replacement, but free agent or what have you, because if it's one thing that the Broncos haven't been able to get a decent guy, or healthy anyways, it's linebacker. We already saw what happened with Mark Barron, the guy who never suited up to play as a freaking Bronco. He just got paid a ton of money to never see the field. And is Chiclo even a linebacker, or is he a defensive end?
I think he's a linebacker.
Okay, he's a linebacker. So Chiclo, I think his best play was in New England, if I'm not mistaken. So other than that, I think it's a wide margin in terms of what the Broncos can do with their 9th pick in the draft.
When he was on the field, though, Chicolo in particular, other teams were just abusing him. I mean, they really were. They were just saying, "Oh, you're there,"
yeah,
and they kind of had a little chuckle. Yeah, I think that's Lattimore, is it not? That you're referring to there, Albert?
Yeah.
There's been quite a bit of talk that Lattimore, I have to double check.
Lattimore, I believe.
I think it's Lattimore.
Yeah.
But Lattimore is certainly someone that may well be available in the offseason, because there's been quite a bit of talk. Actually, this is another item you and I were talking about prior to the show. Is that they might have to start looking at ways of cutting back cap space to get themselves under that bar.
Yeah. Glenn Hauser, thanks for coming on to the show. Love seeing you here. Duke Boynton, thanks for coming on board, brother. Good to see you. But you know what? I think that the biggest, in my opinion, probably the worst free agent pickup of this past offseason had to have been Jurrell Casey. Because Jurrell Casey came in with so much hype, especially for what he had done in the postseason, doing what they did against New England, doing what they did against Baltimore. And they almost had Casey up against the ropes, but unfortunately Casey is Casey. So the fact that we were expecting to get that Jurrell Casey on the field, and week 1 was against Tennessee, mind you, a team that would prefer to pay Derrick Henry and Ryan Tannehill big bucks and let their defense suffer instead of paying Jurrell Casey. And we saw during the regular season and the postseason that, in my honest opinion, I think that Tennessee messed that up. But that's neither here or there. I didn't see the same guy that I saw in those games. I saw a guy that kind of looked like he was lost, and then he ended up getting injured. What was it? Week 3, I believe it was, against the Steelers, and then he was out.
Right, but when you look at what the other teams were doing, I think that told you almost all you needed to know about what they saw of Casey. He was not often double teamed. He was, in fact, I don't think he was ever double teamed. People just did not respect him. They didn't see him as that guy, and I think that's what, unfortunately, the hype train was all about with him. Was he was going to be the difference maker, and Tennessee was willing to let him go. So I think that says a little bit there too, and I think that also goes to show, kind of all the way back to the beginning of the pod, my original comments on why I've been so focused on the interior defensive line is there's kind of two trains of thought. You can go really aggressive on the outside, force teams to try and cover out, and then your interior pressure can get better. And then there's the other line of thinking, which is a little bit more along the lines of how Wade Phillips and our 2015 defense was built, where you had Wolf and Malik Jackson as the D ends, and then you had Sly Williams, who was just kind of the beneficiary of the fact that they were just that darn good. Mm-hmm. And then we got that interior pressure, which then forced coverages to sink in a little bit more, which then allowed Ware and Miller to kind of have their way with the opposing tackles one-on-one. And I've always been a bigger fan of the way that Phillips and our 2015 defenses were built, because I find that they're a little bit more effective and they can stand through the entirety of a season, including the postseason, because that interior pressure also helps against the run. Teams can't run right up that gut, because if your team is that good and that aggressive and can generate that push, it stops the run game a little bit, and it really does help. Mm-hmm. And I think, unfortunately, going back to Casey and tying this all back together in a bit of a bow, is Casey provided nothing, and he didn't get a push. He didn't really get the pressures that we were hoping he would. And I think it just showcased that Tennessee has built a really strong interior and general defensive line there, that Casey was just a cog. He was not the reason. And I think his play this year kind of showed us that.
No, and I totally agree, Rich. And me personally, I don't see Denver bringing back Casey unless it comes to a point where it's like Casey wants to be a Bronco and he restructures his contract to be more team friendly. But I just don't see that happening. No. Because I believe he's going to want to be paid big bucks. It's one of the reasons why he left Tennessee. So, and even so, I don't think any team should pay him that much money if they're going to get that type of play from him, to be honest with you. So unless he goes to a team that runs the same scheme he ran when he was in Tennessee, where he can go back to being a cog on the defensive line and not the guy, then, I wouldn't mind it. But if it's, even though the Broncos may have missed the target on Casey, I believe that they found they hit the target or the bullseye with Shelby Harris. And Shelby Harris was a guy that didn't even get a look around by any other teams during the offseason. And he came back on a 1-year deal, if I'm not mistaken, with Denver. And he more than made up for what I think he should be able to get a big contract for next season.
The only thing I'm concerned with Harris about is when he's getting paid now, in terms of how far along he is actually in his career. Almost like Casey, actually. I think Harris is better than Casey by a mile at this point. I think his play showed that. But my only concern is that as he gets a little bit older and as he kind of starts to age, can his body hold up against that constant grind in the interior of the defensive line? Harris helps with pressure, but that's kind of not his jam. Like, that's not what he's really, really good at. Draymond Jones and DeMarcus Walker are a little bit better at some of the pressure situations. Where Harris makes up for that, though, is in the sack that's not quite a sack and his bats. he might be the best in the league, or certainly one of the best in the leagues at batting passes. I mean, I know that even Fangio, who's basically, you could be the best player on the team and put up all world stats, and he'll still come on his presser. Oh, you did okay. Yeah, you could still do better. But that's kind of the way he is, right? Is he's very, very tight-lipped when it comes to compliments. And I remember in one of his pressers, earlier in the year, he actually praised Shelby Harris in terms of how he was one of the unique talents that he's ever coached at batting passes. And I mean, as far as Fangio goes, he may as well have just like shouted from the hilltops at just how good he is at doing it, because that's as good as you're going to get from Fangio.
George has a question. He asks, how much will Paton care about Fangio's input when it comes to roster changes? I didn't, like I said earlier, Rich, I didn't get to see his presser today. So I don't, and I haven't had a chance to rewatch it. So I don't know how he took the questions and everything that the media had to say to him. But I did read before me and you came on the air today that a lot of people were pretty impressed at the way he handled it. He still has to talk to his scouts. He still has to talk to the other coaches, and he still has a lot to do. So it looks like George Paton is going to have an open mind. And by that, I mean, it's like every input that he gets from Elway, from Fangio, from his scouts, from whoever it is that works underneath him, it's like, okay, I'll take it under advisement. So it's not something that's like, oh, you want this? Okay, let's do it. Or you want that? Okay, let's do it. It's like he's just going to take advisement and, see what he can do, see what he doesn't want to do, see where he moves here and there. So I'd like to think that George is going to come in and listen to what everybody has to say, and maybe he'll be able to get some things that Fangio wants, or maybe even Elway if he still has a say or so in terms of the Broncos roster.
Elway is still atop that hierarchical structure, and I don't know looking over at the Vikings and how they've structured their teams, which I know that Paton was not the GM there, but he certainly had input. He was like the number 2 basically to their GM, and so you have to imagine that. Thanks, Glenn. So you have to look at just in terms of what Paton did in with the Vikings, how he had his input into that roster and all that kind of stuff. So I'm looking ahead at what we have here, and I was telling you before we came live, it's really weird because when you look at the Vikings and you look how Elway operates, they're actually not so dissimilar. Elway has quite a number of expensive veteran contracts that he's kind of upped or brought in. The Vikings are very similar, and that's why they're in a bit of a cap strap situation, not so dissimilar to New Orleans. I don't think the Vikings are as bad this coming year, but they're still not great. And so I have to question, and it will really come down to, where is Elway on his actual trajectory within the organization? If Elway is truly 1 foot in and 1 foot out, then I don't think Paton is going to have any problems basically saying, I don't care what either of you guys say, this is how I'm building the team. Paton has a 6-year deal. Elway's contract ends at the end of next year, and Fangio right now he has a losing record. So let's just call a duck a duck. So if Fangio doesn't start turning things around, then I don't see him being here all the way through the season next year at all. Now, Fangio will have an out if Paton basically tells Fangio to go away and just does everything his way, because then Fangio can point to all of the things that he asked for and that Paton didn't do any of them and said, well, what do you want me to do? Your guy isn't doing what I need. I already told you so, and look at our record as a result. Mm-hmm. So I think for this season, you're going to see probably a little bit more defensive shift to the team, which will align with the fact that we basically went almost all offense in the draft, particularly last year. And then I think it's just basically going to be a punt over of the ball to Fangio and said, all right, you got what you wanted. We stacked the team with largely what you were looking for. have at it.
Mm-hmm. I agree. George asked, was Bosby playing well? You know what? There were a lot of people in Broncos country, especially my co-hosts on the Mile High Roundtable, who were not pleased that the Broncos cut Bosby and that he went and played one game with the Cardinals during the regular season, and then he got cut by the Cardinals after that game. And then he worked his rotation around the waiver wire and was able to land back in Denver. Now, Bosby did have a really good game against the Carolina Panthers, but then he went and laid an egg against Buffalo and even the Raiders, you can say, and heck, maybe even the Chargers, if I'm not mistaken. So I don't know what happened. People were wondering, was he playing injured? Did he get into a fight with Vic Fangio and it's like he didn't want to be there? I mean, it left so much to the imagination as to where the guy that Broncos fans were so much advocating for went, that he just didn't show up after that Carolina game.
This comment is spot on. He was our number 4 cornerback at the time, and by the time he came back, he was thrust into a starting role because we had another 3 cornerbacks that landed on IR shortly there, just before.
Mm-hmm.
So he was basically playing a non-rotational role and playing a starting role. The other thing I don't know if you noticed in a lot of the games is his style of play changed. And that was as a direct result of Fangio. Fangio wants very physical corners. So when you look at Ojemudia, he fits that mold. And then there's the other guy, which I totally forget his name, and I'm gapping on it. The younger guy that was an undrafted. I think he was undrafted from the 49ers. Pardon me?
I think I know what you're talking about, but go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah, he's exactly the type of guy that Fangio likes, the physical tackling, those types of corners. And Bosby is a little bit more like, Motley, exactly. Thank you. Fangio likes those physical corners. He likes those physical guys, and Bosby's more of a coverage type guy. He's more of a follow the receiver, and then he'll try to jump a pass to get an interception, or he'll try to jump and bat a pass. And that's not what Fangio wants, because Bosby in one of those earlier games got beat badly and got burned on trying to jump a route. But then he had another 2 passes in that game where he was like that close to intercepting it, and he actually dropped an interception. Mm-hmm. So the thing is Fangio either needs to learn to play to his players' strength, or he just needs to cut bait and move on and get only guys that fit his mold. You can't do both, right? You can't have it both ways. If a guy is really good at one thing, then you have him do what he's really good at.
Right. George asked, Broncos draft all defense this year except maybe a right tackle. So I guess he's going off of what you said, Rich, in terms of drafting a defense. I don't really see why they would go for a right tackle. They still have Juwan James, and they're paying Juwan James a lot of money, and it's way too early to try to say, hey, we're moving on from you. And we talked about this last week, Rich, that Juwan James is going to be coming into this coming season with some heat already from his offensive lineman teammates, who kind of feel that he needs to earn their respect, because he decided to opt out and not play with them and, be in the trenches with the Broncos this season. So, and I wholeheartedly agree with that philosophy. So Juwan James really cannot come in and, say he's sore, or he can't afford to get injured. He can't afford to come in with any type of negative press, because that is already it's already bad enough, all the press that John Elway has gotten when he decided to go and pay Juwan James, what was it, a 4-year, mega $1 million contract? And so far, he hasn't lived up to par.
I actually think that drafting a right tackle is a very good idea. I'm a huge fan of Daniel Falele. I'm sure I absolutely completely butchered his last name, and I apologize in advance to anyone who was offended in any way, shape, or form. I tried. I am a huge fan of someone like that, and I've been wanting a right tackle similar to him for years now in Broncos country. I think that Juwan James is an injury away from not playing. I also think that the year before now, he showed that he was unwilling to try and push himself to come back and play at less than 100%. And again, much like last week, you and I said, basically the fact that might be the real reason why his teammates are actually saying, you got to prove yourself now, man, because they saw him walking around. They saw him at, 85%. And, what many tackles and, others say is by midseason, if you're 60%, you're healthy. And, and, so anyways, that's kind of my thing is I think we do need to draft a right tackle. Now, in terms of timing, though, the problem with James's contract and the fact that he deferred this year because of COVID, he is worth way more to cut him this year than he is to keep him. Next year, it's better. Like we actually save a little bit of money by cutting him, but it is like you're talking like barely. Like it is. So you have to be very, very careful. So my thing here would be if James plays well and he plays the entire season this year, coming up in the next season, then you may consider keeping him and drafting that right tackle. You can never have enough tackles. Okay, like that is a premium position on a team. And if we've seen nothing else in this league, is the fact that the tackle position is one of the hardest things to nail, and that is in large part because the NFL is different from college. You're not playing that huge spread offense, and frankly, you're just playing against way better players at the NFL level. And the other thing in our division we have to be mindful of is that we also have Joey Bosa, and we have Kansas City with Chris Jones. I know he's interior, but still, and we have a few other guys that in our division and in the AFC in general who are just that darn good. Like they literally are. They're just that good, and you need solid tackle play to compete with them.
Yeah, so I guess just finishing off on the defensive line, we have, and I know we talked about this a little bit, Mike Purcell, who, in my opinion, played really, really good football up until he got injured, unfortunately, and Bradley Chubb, who Bradley Chubb had some games where he played fantastic, and then he just had some games where him and Malik Reed, it's like they were on the side of a milk carton because nobody knew where they were. They were just kind of absent. So the fact that he had such a up and down roller coaster, it kind of just feels weird to say or to even know. But I think that Bradley Chubb definitely earned his I'm sorry, I'm drawing a blank. His Pro Bowl, his nod into the Pro Bowl ship. So, and he did it without Von Miller. So, unfortunately for Broncos country, we have yet to see just how dangerous those two guys are together. And unfortunately, we were supposed to get that last season, and all we got was a bunch of, where are these guys? How come they're not getting to the quarterback? What is Vic Fangio doing wrong? And just when it started to come around, to look like it was starting to happen, Bradley Chubb gets hurt. And then this season, when it looks like it's going to happen again, Von Miller gets hurt. So what do you think is or what do you project for 2021, Rich?
Well, the big question is Von. I think Von Miller needs to learn that his natural body size is slim and not bulky. Every time he decides to go on a protein shake binge and work out like a beast, he comes back and hurts himself. So he's just got to stop it, right? Like he's a slender guy, and that's cool. Just do your thing and try to get it done that way. Both seasons that he's gone out and try to bulk up, he's gotten hurt. He tore his ACL the 1 year. Remember he was doing that extreme workout on the sand and stuff when you saw those videos, and you're like, yeah, and then he tears his ACL. And then he does the same thing again this past season where he said, I was working out every day, 3 times a day, blah, blah, blah. He comes back and there goes his, he messed up
his angular tendon. Yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, some, I say this all the time, is that some guys are just meant, like their bodies are just meant to be at a certain shape and size and weight, right? And so sometimes you get a guy who is meant to be really big and their body can take it, and other guys are meant to be slimmer and their bodies are designed that way, and their bodies are expecting that, and their tendons and ligaments and all that kind of stuff can absorb the punishment of the NFL, but only if they're that size. Only if they are that kind of, whether it be really big or smaller, that's what they're designed to do. In terms of Bradley Chubb, I completely agree with what you said. I actually think he deserved his Pro Bowl nod. And that's what happens when you're double and triple teamed. I mean, he was the draw on the opposing defense. So, I mean, I don't know if you go back and look at the different tape and the different games and that kind of stuff, but all coverages were slid his way. He was almost always chipped, and yet he still did really well. And I think that should be very, very encouraging for Broncos fans. He's definitely someone that you can expect to build upon. And it's also one of the reasons why I actually think we should seriously consider someone like a Rosso as or someone similar to that in the first round of the draft, especially, I hate to say it, especially if we're kind of looking at Vaughn's incident as kind of, the end of the line, because we're going to need someone else to complement as an outside linebacker with Chubb is a lot more like a Khalil Mack in terms of general size, and so he can kind of do those bull rushes, and he can kind of push some of the larger opponents' linemen out of the way and kind of get around them that way. What we really do need is that speed guy again, who has that first jump that Vaughn offered us, because that's a completely different skill set and something that would really benefit us.
Right. George has a question. He asked, or actually a comment, I'm sorry. I think Paton was only going to let Vaughn come back if he takes a pay cut or they restructure. And that kind of leads us into the topic about our new GM, Rich. I talked about it a little bit before we went out. We came on the air. And I think that he's got his work cut out for him in terms of trying to see who he wants to have back, who fits where, trying to take, Vic Fangio's input, whatever John Elway wants to have input to say. And again, I feel like it's all going to be taken under advisement, but at the end of the day, it's going to come down to George having to make tough decisions. And I believe he's going to make some decisions that are really going to not confuse Broncos country, but more so much maybe anger people. And unfortunately, it's things that have to be made. So I honestly wouldn't be surprised if he decided to, move on from Von Miller, or to not give Justin Simmons a big contract and let him test free agency, or he's going to do something that eventually is going to rock the cradle, so to speak.
I think there's a couple things at play here. So one is Broncos ownership, right? And I don't think you can talk about any of this without talking about the lack of ownership that we currently have sitting atop, and the fact that there's a court case that's going through the system right now. I think it'll be very, very telling as the fan base here to look at what's happening and say, okay, if they're going to simply shed a whole bunch of people and then not bring a whole bunch of people in to kind of rebalance those scales, I think that should tell us as Broncos fans that we're likely going to be seeing a change of ownership, because that will lighten the cap load, that will free up a lot of additional cap space. And then I think that will allow our team to be far more desirable for a new owner to want to buy the team, so that they can then put their stamp on it. That's my opinion, obviously, and I'm sure there'll be many that disagree. However, if the thought within the trust, primarily Ellis, who I believe is likely the driving force behind the trust with his football acumen and the fact that he's been with the team and was very much right alongside Pat Bowlen through almost, for a number of years. I think if Ellis is basically saying, no, it's staying within the Bowlen family, we already have our next owner already in the building, then I think you're going to start seeing more strategic style moves. I think you're going to start seeing Casey getting cut. I think you're going to see Boye getting cut. I think you're going to see Von Miller will, especially with this incident, he will get hardball. It'll be hardball basically at that point. It'll be like, here's what we're doing, here's why we want to do it, and this is what we're doing, and it'll be all in the open and in the public, so that Vaughn is then put between a rock and a hard place to say, hey, I messed up, but then I'm now going to be the one that has to say bye-bye, and it'll be then off of Elway and off of Paton. And then I think what you're going to start seeing is more of a team rebuild through free agency and other things, as opposed to if we were getting new ownership, and that's what the trust kind of mindset is, you're going to start seeing free agents come in if the ownership is staying put, if the ownership is staying within the Bolin family. I think you're going to start seeing, like, again, going all the way back to the beginning of the pod, I think you're going to start seeing, maybe them bringing in an interior D lineman to complement and give that push up the middle. I think you're going to start seeing, maybe what's his name, Ngakoue, maybe, if we can get him as a defensive end, who's my prototypical general size that I like for defensive ends. I think you'll start seeing pieces like that being either traded for or brought in as free agents. And I think that should be very promising for us as Broncos fans, because then we should expect to be competitive this year.
Me personally, Rich, I think that unless something comes out that's like damning evidence, and it's something that no amount of PR can not so much sweep under the rug, but kind of trying to make it seem different in a different amount of light, I think that Von Miller stays as a Bronco this offseason, but there'll be so much pressure on him by the front office seeing, okay, we're going to keep you for your last year of your contract, but you'll have to restructure, and then they're going to watch how he plays, if he gets injured, if he can generate any of his old numbers, if he can be the Von Miller that of well, not so much of old, because obviously as you age you start losing your prime little by little, but if he can bring back that leadership that this defensive line has sorely missed this past offseason, then I think that he'll stay on board as a Bronco, even without John Elway driving the ship anymore. But I wholeheartedly agree with what you say in terms of George Paton going out and reaching out and bringing in free agents and whatnot over the next couple of seasons. There has been people that have said that they don't believe he's going to make a big splash this offseason, that maybe he's saving it for the next year and beyond, which I tend to agree, because I don't think he can absorb everything that the Denver has been going through in such a short amount of time, unless he decides to go and make a blockbuster trade and surprise the heck out of everybody. No. But I think that he needs to have a season under his belt where he can see, okay, these cogs are working, or we can improve this here, and make changes, so forth.
I disagree. We have too much cap space we can shed. He has all the money that he's going to need to make a big move this year. He can shed Boye. He can shed Casey. He can shed Vaughn, because remember, this is an option year for Vaughn. This is not guaranteed. This is not guaranteed money. This is all on the Broncos and the front office and whether or not they want to bring him back or not. So I mean, and if I'm not mistaken, I think this year we still paying for Flacco, which has then come off the books as well, if I'm not mistaken.
No, I think he was only 2 years. We should be done with Joe Flacco, if I'm not mistaken.
But so either way, I mean, you have that's a lot of money that's off the books at that point. I mean, you have 30, 40, 50, you have a lot of cap space at that point to start playing with. Even with the cap reduction, you're then well under that cap in order to start making some moves and making some changes. So I mean, I understand what you're saying. I just happen to disagree with it, because I believe that you have a lot of room under the cap with cutting all of those players. I mean, Boye with his suspension is enough, I believe, probably within any normal contract to basically said, see ya, bye-bye. I think the Casey one, I know that at this point of his contract, he's basically on basically borrowed money, like none of it's guaranteed at all, so he's gone. And again, any signing bonus money is basically still being paid for by Tennessee, not by us. So again, I understand what you're saying. I just happen to disagree that I think we have enough money to cut a bunch of people and then free that back up for ourselves. And thank you, Boggins. You're 100% correct. Kareem Jackson's another one that I would be more than fine with getting rid of. And I know the unpopular decision and discussion here is Justin Simmons was also on a tag this year, which was guaranteed money right off the top of the cap. Again, our last episode, we were talking about Dak Prescott, because we were talking about the offense. Again, when you tag someone, that's a direct hit off your top line of your cap. So if we were to not bring Simmons back for whatever reason this offseason, that would then free up, I think he was 13 or 14 million right off the top of the cap as well.
Mm-hmm.
So again, it really depends on what Payton's priorities are in terms of the list, what the front office's priorities are in terms of the list, and more importantly, what the cap numbers that they're willing to pay some of these players are in terms of on that list. So for example, if Simmons is basically saying, I'm not paying for anything less than 15, average per year, is that something that our front office is willing to say, okay?
I see your point. Real quick before we go, trade a 9 for Lattimore and extend him.
I love Lattimore. I think he's a fantastic corner. I mean, I don't know if I'm sure most of us watched the games over the weekend. He had some plays. He had some legit plays. I mean, yeah. He really did. And I think he's very much along the lines of what Denver really needs to be targeting. We need to stop going after these guys that are they're at the back end of their careers that we're hoping are going to kind of have a bit of a resurgence at the back end. And we need to start going towards the guys that are on the upswing, so that we're getting them almost like what we did with Champ Bailey. And mm-hmm. I think what people are kind of missing in some of my comments and stuff like that I'm making, and I realize that some things that I'm saying are probably upsetting to some people, but I'm a huge fan of bringing in young talent like a Lattimore who are at the upswing in their career, just like we did with Champ Bailey. Champ Bailey had years with our team when Pat Bullen was here, and we brought him in early, and he was Hall of Fame cornerback. I mean, mm-hmm. I mean, he is what he is. So yes, there's a cost with those types of guys, but they're a proven commodity, which is huge because a draft is a roll of the dice, and I don't care which player they are. Even a player like Trevor Lawrence, rather, is still a roll of the dice. You still don't know if they're truly going to succeed at the NFL level. I mean, you can look at him and say it's almost as close to a sure thing, but you still don't really know 100%. And bringing in a guy like Lattimore, you already have tape and say he can compete with the best of them and do well.
Right. No, I totally agree. And unfortunately, this is a subject that we could sit here and talk about all night. But unfortunately, folks, we are out of time. So we're going to have to wrap it up now. Thank you guys for coming and being a part of the second episode of Broncos Talk. We do hope you enjoyed the commentary that Rich and myself have brought to you today. Just a couple of reminders. If you're listening to us on audio on Anchor, make sure you hit that notification button so you're always up to date when the episodes go live. Also, if you want to be a monthly supporter of the show, click that button so you can support Rich and myself. And don't forget to watch Mile High Roundtable on Thursdays at 6 o'clock Central, 7 Eastern, 4 Pacific. And I think I'm missing one. I can't remember.
For those of you that are in here in the chat still and all that kind of stuff, really appreciate if you guys can share the links to all the shows to your all of your followers and whatnot on Twitter. Really want to grow the show, get as many people in here as possible. Love to talk more Broncos with more people and get as many people in with as many diverse opinions as possible.
Yeah. Also, if you want to follow me on Twitter, my Twitter handle is at the letter A, number 6, FT10. The word Mexican, a 6'10" Mexican altogether. My co-host, it's at Rich, RICH. You can give him a follow on Twitter as well. And, you can give us comments, ideas, and suggestions about what you think of the show as well. So thank you guys for tuning in. We'll see you all next Tuesday, same time, same channel. So for Rich, I'm Adan Diaz. Have a good night, guys.
And let's vote for Justin Simmons as a